And I guess my worry is we could get to 2 or 3 years from now, we could have more affordable housing, and we'll have taken the wrong lesson from all this, which is that the important thing is not to build, it's to keep foreigners out.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm Michael Sangster, your host. I'm excited today. I don't get excited at my age very often anymore, but I've got a gentleman with me today. We actually went to the same schools in Winnipeg. Can't say we knew each other well, but actually went to the same schools in Winnipeg. And Alex Usher, president of HESA, has joined us today. If you're anywhere around international education, post-secondary education in Canada, you've read something he's written, you've listened to him talk at an event, or you've been to one of his functions that really force thinking, thought-provoking conversations. And I'm excited to have Alex join us today because we haven't set any agenda for what we're going to talk about today. We're just going to talk and see what's going on in the sector. We may talk about career colleges a little bit. We might talk about international students, who knows, but really just have a conversation about post-secondary education. Everything's going on. So, Alex, welcome. Introduce yourself to people. We let people do their own intros here.
Oh, that's simple. My name's Alex Usher. I'm president of Higher Education Strategy Associates, which is a sector consultancy here in Toronto. Do a lot of work in Canada. I do some work abroad. Every year, I write 2 big publications. One's called The State of Post-Secondary Education in Canada, which reviews all the statistics about how the system's looking in Canada. And I do another one called The World of Higher Education. That's a global update, about 80 pages, what's going on in higher education. Also do a podcast like you. But again, it's also called The World of Higher Education. We bring in people from all over the world to talk about developments in higher education where they are.
I've listened many times. There's been some great conversation here about trend lines. And I do like the fact that you go beyond our borders. Why don't we just be a little unique and surprise people? Tell me about the session you just hosted in Ottawa, which was focused on the university world. I know you and I see eye to eye on this a little bit. We don't see ourselves as competitors to colleges and universities. We see ourselves as a different brand, a different group. But what came out of that? Because it looked like a very interesting group of people. Dalton McGuinty, Bob Ray. It looked quite awesome.
It was fun, I'll tell you. So we had John Stackhouse, Bob Ray, Dalton McGuinty doing a kind of fireside to start us off. And there were a couple moments in there that I think did make people gasp. I would say the big one is when Dalton McGuinty sort of said, I'm not sure what we actually bought with the $6 billion that is his government, put into universities and colleges. This is back 2005, I guess, 2006. And he said, we bought change in the K-12 system. We bought change in the healthcare system. I could see that health wait times were going down. Knee replacements were getting done faster. Couldn't see any of that in universities and colleges. It got people thinking. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. So this is Stackhouse was John was driving the point home. He's saying, look, guys, this is your best friend. This is the premier who has been the most pro post-secondary pretty much of any premier in the last quarter century. And he doesn't know what he bought with all that niceness. That should worry you, right? And as Bob said, he said, boy, because there's not any, among the current crop, there's nobody who's like this, right? There's nobody who's really well disposed towards higher education. So that got people thinking. But the main thing about our conference is I got all the troublemakers together. Like that was what was fun, is not everyone at a university wants to be, is a change maker. And I think we got the people who wanted to see change, and they all got in the room and they felt really good about being together because that doesn't happen that often. And so there were lots of people with lots of ideas, and we talked about loads of things. Who made a big impact was Julia Christensen Hughes, who I know is one of your members. She came and
I was just going to ask you, how was Julia? Because I think she's one of the most dynamic speakers you hear anywhere.
She made a great case for why private universities can do things that publics can't. And what were those kinds of things? Because obviously, she was at University of Guelph for a couple decades before she got to her current position. And she could compare and contrast, like there's some pros and there's some cons. But here's the way that we can experiment and fail fast. I know she didn't fail, that's not the word she used, but basically we can experiment faster. We can iterate faster. At my university, we couldn't do anything like that in the public sector. And people went, well, actually, that's kind of useful. That is interesting. Maybe we should pay more attention to this sector or this group of institutions. Yeah.
It's funny you have that, you mentioned her, because she was exactly who I wanted to ask you about. When I took on this role, I went up to a conference by Career College of Ontario, and there was 2 speakers. She was the opening one, and she blew me away with her thinking about partnership and the way colleges and universities and career colleges need to work together. And then Dr. Murgatroyd got up afterwards and talked about co-opetition and talked about how colleges and universities and career colleges need to work together and build programs together, ladder people up, get people back to work, and then let them have a chance to go on. And we got talking about PSWs into nursing. And it was a very interesting opening for me into this role because I didn't come from the sector. I was very glad to hear she was there. And most people don't realize they own the Toronto Film School, which is a very successful economic driver in Toronto, and it's a regulated career college. People don't really make that connection, and it's an amazing institution to walk around in. So what are you seeing trend lines? What scares you? And kind of strange you mentioned that Premier McGuinty didn't know what he got for his $6 billion. That's the same number we talked about in Ontario last week for the colleges and universities. There's a certain irony there.
I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the Conservatives picked that number so it was just a little bit bigger than what McGuinty did.
What are you seeing? What are the trends that you're seeing, or what scares you these days?
Look, the Ontario stuff was good news in the sense that the institutions got a little bit more money. It's bad news in that a lot of it is coming out of the poorest group of students because they're rating OSAP in order to get the money, which is unfortunate. So one trend I see right now is we're going to be talking a lot more about student debt than we have been in a long. The student debt was a really big deal in the mid-90s. It was one thing that everyone could say was bad. Like students in universities could both say it's bad, even if they had different positions on tuition fees, right? Like it just student debt is bad. You should give more money to poorer students. And that's what they're back. So I think we're going to be back to, Ontario's had a few years now where average debt coming out of a university degree has been under $20,000. And that's been true basically since the big student aid changes of 2016. We're going to be heading back to a world where it's 35, 40,000 is the average in Ontario within 2 or 3 years. And that's going to make people scream. So that's one trend I feel pretty good about. Like that's going to be something we're going to be talking about. Second thing is it's great that Ontario did what it did. Other provinces are still in the business of cutting, right? So BC is not cutting, but it's kicking the can down the road, right? Because they're broke. News out of New Brunswick this week says the province wants to take $30 to $50 million out of the public post-secondary system to fund whatever the Liberals are spending on. I'm not sure, but it's not a tax breaks for the Irvings probably. And no, seriously, the Irvings got $45 million for tariff relief. And that's exactly how much money it seems like they're going to take out of the post-secondary system. So there's no free lunch.
That won't surprise anybody in New Brunswick.
That's right. You still have problems I think you're going to see cuts in Newfoundland. I think everything that Nova Scotia is doing right now to its university system is setting up for a fairly big cut next year. I don't think you'll see cuts in Manitoba. So prairies, I don't think you'll see cuts. But you won't see growth either. So I think the system's stuck, and the feds are doing their best. They're signaling that there's absolutely no way that they're going to change course on international students, which I'm sure we'll get to later. So I think we're going to see continued squeeze in the public post-secondary sector. I mean, the universities are more brittle than the colleges, so I think you'll hear a lot more whining out of the universities than from the colleges. Because although some of them have started to make cuts, they haven't made the kind of cuts that colleges did last year. Colleges got right to they went to the bone really quickly, some of them, right? They did most of it last year. They're doing some of it this year. I think it's going to take universities 3 or 4 years to get to where they want. Even you get some really big schools, like University of Calgary is talking about a $35 million deficit this year. Like these are big numbers at big schools. So you're going to see continued shrinking. You're going to see them look for new forms of income, which could be things like micro-credentials or whatever. But I'm not convinced that universities are the best place, are the place where you're going to see the biggest innovation on that score, because they're not necessarily that good at it.
Nimble. One of the things our sector is good at, but what we're seeing in many provinces as they make cuts is the international student revenue stream is dried up or shrunk to minimal numbers. Is governments looking to find ways to protect them with every penny they can, and that's going to start to hurt our sector a little bit, the career college sector, because while we don't take funding for operational issues, the student grants, the loans, those are important decisions for our average students. We just did a study with Nick Downs, and we went through a lot of these numbers, and we looked at the results of students and graduates and where they work and how important student loans and grants were. It's a big part of how these 32-year-old single moms and parents with children manage to fund going back to school. So it's going to have an impact on us too.
And we're seeing that in Ontario, right? So they've made some new changes, again, making it harder. They're making it harder for everyone to get grants, but they're really going after the privates in a way that they're not with the public. So
you're starting to see student unions come out in favor of us and the public institutions, and because of the cuts that are being made, and it's going to have a massive impact. And you got it right. They've just moved from one level to another, the money.
Yeah.
And they have taken it from the students to pay for the university and college payments.
Yeah.
We've seen the cuts at the college level. You think they're nimble enough to make some of those next ones that are going to be needed, the selling of a building and making those big changes if this continues? Because that's hard.
Well, it's hard because there's not many sellers. There's not many buyers, right? Like it's one thing to say, if I've got a downtown campus or I've got a campus somewhere else. And you've seen this, right? Like there are a couple of Ontario colleges that are getting rid of campuses because that's a discrete set of buildings you can do something with. You can't really sell your student union, right? Like it's in the middle of campus. It's attached to a lot of other buildings. I mean, this is why universities and colleges don't get mortgages. They put money out in the bond market and that's what they use, or they have a long-term credit facility with banks and they use that to build buildings rather than mortgages because the mortgage is useless. The actual property they can't sell it. And this is why Laurentian, for instance, had all that debt. Well, normally, most of that was from building. Yeah, sure, you put a mortgage against the building, but no bank would give them a mortgage. So they had these long-term loans with some debt swaps and whatever else. But that's why it's hard to sell a building other than back to the government. Like I think what you may see in some cases, and this will be a pretty way around things, which is you sell the building to the government charges you rent.
Interesting.
At a slightly reduced rate. Like I can see that happening. So in effect, the government's just, gives you an advance on a bunch of money.
Yeah, moving it around. Well, let's twist it a bit. What makes you optimistic? These are difficult times right now, but what makes you optimistic, or what are you seeing right now that you went, oh, that's really neat?
I've seen lots of things. Look, the good news is, are we in a very big pinch? Yes, there are very few places. Argentina obviously is worse, right? Or someplace like that where they're cutting 40% out of the budget. There are other countries that...
Or Puerto Vallarta today.
Today, yes. This is a big squeeze. The good news is we're starting from a really high base, right? Like we were a well-funded system before. Now we're an averagely funded system. There are things that we can do away with. I think people are learning to say no. And that's a really big one, right? Is like institutions that can actually say, no, actually, that's not our business. We're not going to do that. Or we're going to do less of something. That's a really big deal. And it's not, the habit of saying yes to everything is not easily unlearned, particularly in universities. But there's a lot of troublemakers out there. There's a lot of people who want to try new things. And I think I'm starting to hear, like it's slow, right? Like last year I went to this big meeting. It's called CAUBA, Canadian Association of University Business Officers. And the great thing is there were so many sessions that were about, here's how we're using data to make better decisions. And it was a great presentation about like, this is how we do the data. This is where we get the data from. And I would stick my hand up at the end. I'm like, yeah, okay, but what was the difference in the decision you made? They go, well, we're not there yet. Right? So people are still making gut level decisions, not data driven decisions, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Like we're putting the things in place. Like I think this will be a much leaner and better run sector in 2 or 3 years. And it will be painful to get there, but I can see the steps being taken in different places.
You have a great leader around the world you've seen in this sector that you're going, well, that's somebody we got to watch that's doing really interesting stuff.
So, I mean, look, it's bleak out there. It is bleak out there. I mean, the examples that I think are really interesting, Greece, the Greek government is making big strides to get rid of what was really an ossified system and make it modern and nimble. Right. I think that's really interesting. Uzbekistan, that's a country that's quintupled the size of its university system in the last decade. And they're really looking for ways to improve research. And they're using they're bringing in a lot of foreign talent, foreign campuses to act as competition for the local group. Like that's really interesting. And I think Vietnam is making some big plans to have bigger universities, better universities. get rid of some of the smaller specialist institutions, merge them into some bigger multiversities. Again, inviting in a lot of foreign institutions to act as competition. Those are the three countries that I think are really interesting right now.
One of the things I've found is interesting. I've been watching closely, but we're seeing a lot of our career colleges in conversation. I should say a lot, but I could probably get 15 of them around the world partnering in foreign countries to train workers there. And some of them is for courses like the PSW program or for nursing. I've seen these conversations. I just saw one announced in Ethiopia last week with IBT College from Toronto. And they're going over and let's say training 100 students a year and trying to line up 20 or 30 to come to Canada, but leaving 70. Because I know there was anxiety in our sector by some about, hang on a second here, if we're just bringing people over and actually harming that local country by bringing all their nurses from the Philippines, which happened, and other countries, we really need to think about some of these. So I'm actually seeing some of this international fallout being our colleges being asked around the world to start talking about how can we do creative partnerships to train people locally and then bring some in. And I know IRCC appreciates that because they're well trained when they get here. Maybe go through a refresher course, everybody feels good, and they go to work. So it's one of the things that has me a little bit optimistic, but we can't be here and not talk about international students on some level. Do you see more cuts? It is what it is now. We're like in Ontario, we get no PALs. So we're not getting any of the students anymore where we used to, but at the peak.
If you're at zero, you can't get any lower. The good news is it's only getting better.
It's a good point. It's a good point.
I think we're 3 years away from any increase national. So the federal government did set out targets in the last budget, and that's going down next year and the year after. Maybe 28, 29. I don't know. I mean, my worry is, I get where the Carney government's coming from this, right? Is they will make the case that this is a housing issue above all, right? And as we've seen student numbers go down, we're seeing housing, we're seeing rental prices going down pretty significantly in some places. And I guess my worry is we could get to 2 or 3 years from now, we could have more affordable housing. And we'll have taken the wrong lesson from all this, which is that the important thing is not to build, is to keep foreigners out. And I worry about that, right? Like, I think, if we're only working on the demand side and not working on the supply side, that's just that kind of typical Canadian mediocrity, frankly, which is that we want to settle for mediocre. We could do something great. We could be a big country. We could be attracting lots of people. Just think about this international moment, right? When global talent flows are changing all over the place, we could be doing great things, and we're not because we don't have houses. So I'm worried that we're too complacent to actually go after international students again. That does worry me.
We cannot possibly train enough nurses.
Exactly.
From the Canadian population. We just can't do it. I use one stat all the time because I love it, but we're going from 7 workers for every retiree to 2 for every retiree by 2035.
That's about right.
It's just not sustainable. We will not have the workforce we need to take care of people.
Yeah.
And just in healthcare, never mind everything else that we're talking around logistics and cybersecurity and every other sector that we need people in.
Yeah.
We will not have the workforce we need to do care work.
I'll tell you the other thing that I would expect then in the next year or two particularly is there will be actually quite big jumps in pay at the lower end of the spectrum just because we're running out of these workers. And so what you tend to see is what's been happening in the US for the last few years and getting worse now that they're chasing away all the immigrants is actually you're going to get a lot of wage pressure at the bottom because those are jobs that locals don't necessarily want to take. In some countries, like in Japan, they automate. Here, we bring in temporary foreign workers. And that's how we deal with wage pressure in a declining demographic context. And I would say Canadian business is pretty addicted to using low wage. Like if you give them a choice, do you want to automate or do you want to use low wages? They'll go low wages most of the time. And that's why we had so many temporary foreign workers. That's why we had so many international students, many of whom were indistinguishable from temporary foreign workers. So yeah, I imagine there will be pressure to go back up in a year or two. But, we'll see. The politics are really interesting.
At some point, I'm going to have to arrange a dinner for you, me, and my colleague, Jason Altmeyer, who's the CEO of CQ, Career Education Colleges and Universities in the U.S., our partner organization, and former congressman. The perspective from him about what's going on in their politics and immigration and ICE and education change is quite dramatic. That would be an interesting interview for you on your podcast. He's an interesting guy. He's a former congressman too. but he's got a very, very unique perspective from all the states they work in. So we always get personal with people a little bit. We ask people about two things. I'm going to hit first a skill that made Alex successful. And is it something you developed, or maybe it's something you fight? Because we ask you, maybe I fight procrastination every day. I have to make a list and get 5 things done to get momentum in the morning, or I'm done. I need momentum to start the day, and that's my weakness. So I worked at that. But have you got a strength or a weakness? And this is aimed at students, so they can take something if they've listened to this and go, oh, yeah, I can work on that, or I've got that.
I always say, if you were a student of history, which was my undergraduate degree was in history, and lots of people think, history enrollment's declining and everything else, because no one sees a relationship to the job market. And I said, the one thing that history gives you is a bullshit detector. The one way they train you is to look at literally every document and saying, what's left out? Who's writing this? What's their point of view? What's left out? What are the other possible alternatives to what this person is saying? And I find that with a minimal amount of statistical training, so you can really look at numbers. And I don't mean whether or not you can do regressions or not, something like that, although that's helpful. But just being able to look at a data and being able to tell a story with it, right? Which is also something they teach in history, which is how to tell stories. So skepticism about data, able to provide alternative interpretations of data, those are things I get out of a hobbyist view of statistics and a bachelor's degree in history. And I would say almost everything that I've done in my life has been because of those two things. Read data, detect bullshit.
And I'm going to tell you, the funny part was I forgot when I took this job and we knew each other, when I started reading some of your stuff. And then it reconnected with me. But you've been that way with our sector. Mm-hmm. You've called bullshit. You've challenged us, but you've also not been afraid at podiums to say the good things about our sector. Mm-hmm. So I think I would agree with you. It is a challenge. And maybe there's who marries my zinger. Maybe I'll move it up. What's our biggest wart? When you look at our sector, what's our biggest wart?
The whole sector or the private vocational colleges?
The private sector. There's a lot of myths, but you know this stuff.
Yeah, there is a lot of myths. I would say, I don't even think it's necessarily a wart of the sector. I mean, I think, people try to make, it's capitalism, you try and make easy money. And I think there's a lot of easy money to be made in education, not just for the private sector. The public sector does this too. Just one look at private universities in the States and you can see people trying to, make a mint out of various types of, there has been a lot of, basic fraud in the system. And it's not because the whole system is fraudulent. It's some of the best, student loan repayment rates. I was thinking about this today. I can't remember why, but, pet grooming schools, right? Everyone always go, pet grooming schools. Why would you use student loans for that? I'm like, you know what? They pay their loans back so fast. Like, it's so good because it's so quick and it's so career focused. People get jobs like that and, they come back. So there's lots of areas, I think, where the system has done some really good things. I think because the private sector has not actually been forced necessarily to compete with public institutions on some really basic data. That's not a knock on the privates necessarily. It's a knock on the people who, accounting for the different clienteles and accounting for the different kind of education. Are the outcomes really that different between public and private? And I think, one of the interesting things about places like Yorkville or any of those kinds of institutions is actually maybe there's not that big a difference. I work with private institutions that are setting up in different parts of the country, in Ontario and BC, these are universities. And it's amazing how fast they can do things. So I think it's great, but I think there's a lot of people in the old days, I would say the sector was not great at calling out abuses within the sector, right? And it's hard.
And we try every day. We try every day with our regulators, but you're right. It's hard to find it.
It's hard to find it. And I think it's something you're doing better now than you were 20 years ago.
That's, I think, a very fair comment of our warts.
Yeah. But it takes time to get rid of those warts in the eyes of the public. You just see how fast people turned against privates in the international student stuff. And no one, and it's not a left-right thing, right? Corey Tenike, he was the one who convinced Ford to go after the privates really hard. And it's not the guy you would think is the most anti-private sector guy, but boy, he understood the deep skepticism that people have about private higher education. And, so God bless you for what you're doing, but you're going to need to keep doing it for another couple decades.
And I always say I've been around politics far too long. When the other guy has the flag and a podium, you're in trouble. if you're not standing next to them making the announcement. And when Miller and Fraser got up and made their announcements, even though they may not have known at the time, but they came to know that they weren't right on the volume of international students in our institutions.
Yep.
Didn't matter. That was the story. And now I'm live on TV right after the minister, right literally on Power Politics with Minister Miller and then me. And I'm contradicting him, but he had a flag and a podium and a narrative that people might generally think is accurate.
Yep.
It's a tough fight, but we're not going to stop. So finish on our last question. We always ask people, we try and keep this around a half hour. Education is, it's about learning stuff, and it's about mentoring and learning skills.
Mm-hmm.
Who's a mentor in your life that made it all happen? And you can say a few. Maybe it wasn't Mr. Tanner at River Heights Junior High School that was your mentor. It was one of mine.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. I ran track with Mr. Tanner.
I was going to say it's a track thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got a mentor that changed your path?
I think there were two big ones. So the first was Bob Best, and he was the head of government relations at what was then called the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada. Now it's Universities Canada. He hired me. He didn't have to. I mean, that's what got me in full time out of, after leaving student politics. And he brought me in, and he gave me the chance to work with a really interesting coalition. He helped me understand what government relations was all about. That was a really big deal. It was the 2 years I spent at Universities Canada, and he brought me in and gave me opportunities that I don't think very many other people had. The other was a couple years later when I was just figuring out what to do, and he was the CEO of the Canada Millennium Scholarship Foundation. And he needed me because he needed, as he said, I need someone who can tell me when the provinces are lying to me about what provincial student aid can and can't do. Because he wanted to go and negotiate. We had to negotiate. He hired me as his negotiator. We had to negotiate $2.5 billion worth of agreements in about 15 weeks in all these places across the country. And then when that was done, he put me in charge of a research program. What is it that student aid actually does? If someone else ever has $2.5 billion to spend on student aid, what should they spend it on? So that's really what got me into my current sort of more research-like role. Norman Riddell, sorry, I didn't give you his name. And he had been a deputy minister in 2 provinces. He'd been a deputy minister in Quebec and one in Saskatchewan. And he just understood how government worked. Between those two, those were people who had long careers in the sector. And I learned a ton from them. And there's no way I would be in the position I'm in if it weren't for those two.
Do you think he knows that he was a mentor to you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
It's always interesting to ask that question. Most people say, yeah, I did actually let him know. One of the great things, I joke around about this with my curling team, because I'm from Western Canada, we all curl. One of the interesting things we talk about, 4 guys with COVID, we share feelings we didn't share before.
Yeah.
Things change, right? And so it's interesting to ask that question. Actually, a few people have said, actually, I went back a couple of years ago to make sure that so-and-so knew, because they really did have an impact on me.
Yeah.
So, and you only just hope you had good impacts, right? Alex, I want to thank you. I think we'll leave it there for today, unless you've got a last thought you want to share.
No, this was fun.
I appreciate it, Alex. It's good to have a kind of a laid back, kind of fun chat and bounce around some topics. You don't judge, and we appreciate that. And we're looking forward to staying in touch more this year. So with that, we'll call it a day on this edition of the EdUp Canada podcast. And we look forward to having you all back next week. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4 or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.